Well, hey again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the GEB America podcast. My co-host, Stephen Gunn, is with me today. We want to thank our sponsors, Gladius Solutions and Energized Health. And we're so thrilled to have the one and only John Tesh joining us this morning. And we were talking before we started, John, as I was curious, it's 7 a.m. Pacific time when we joined up to record this. Are you the early riser? And I guess that's become something part of your life.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of reasons. One is that I feel like I can get what Cal Newport calls deep work done, where I can just be by myself and do and write, whether it's music or whatever. But also when I went through, and we could talk about it, but actually 9 years ago yesterday, I was given 18 months to 2 years to live with a rare form of cancer diagnosis. And so having beat that back with a combination of medicine and focused healing prayer, I think I wake up that early because I'm like, okay, I've been given another chance. Get up at 4:30, don't lay in the bed.
Wasting time, valuable. My father-in-law, for everything, he says we're burning daylight.
Before anybody thinks that I'm sort of some Superman, I'm in bed to sleep at 8:30 at night. So
fair enough. So first real question for you is, the thing that I thought was so interesting when I read through your bio. Of course, I've known about you for years and followed you, but some of the early beginnings. Take us back to before you started a very successful career in journalism and all that you've been able to do. How did that begin, and when did you kind of know that hey, there might be a skill set here I've got?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, there's a way to answer this that I think will make everything clear, and that is that I was born in 1952 on Long Island. And a few years ago, I wrote a book called Relentless, and it was basically I was going through my cancer journey at the time, and HarperCollins came to me and they said, "Hey, would you be interested in writing a book?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to stay alive here." And they said, "Oh, that would be an interesting chapter." I think it'll be more than one. So it was basically what I did was I titrated in the battle that my wife Connie Selican and I were going through against this horrible disease, but also telling my life story, through it. And isn't it fascinating when whether you journal or whatever, you write a book or just write stuff down. When you look back at your life, you get a really good perspective as to why did I make that decision? Why did I do this? And the reason I bring up the publishing house is that when I was finished with the book and sent the manuscript in, there was like a 23-year-old, God bless him, who was in charge of PR, and he wrote a PR release and sent it to me for approval. And it leads with, John Tesh, endured a youthful life of abuse and whatever. The whole thing, like abusive childhood, And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, it's right here in your book. And what I didn't realize was that describing my parents and how they raised me in the 1950s was normal back then, where there was a line in the sand that my piano teacher, if I was playing my scales wrong and not paying attention, would take a ruler and smack me on the knuckles. My dad was a World War II veteran who was he was a chief petty officer, and if you've ever seen The Great Santini with Robert Duvall, he basically ran our house like a chief petty officer. But I thought it was really interesting that, and my parents didn't even know where my school was. And a lot of people my age will, even you guys might resonate with this. And my parents didn't see me. I left for school on my bicycle, and then they didn't see me and all the rest of my friends until the street lights came on. That was the rule, right? And the reason I bring that up is that I spent a lot of time in our finished basement creating stuff. I was a really skinny, unpopular kid in school, and my dad had, for some reason, he had a reel-to-reel tape recorder in the basement and a microphone that attached to that. There was an upright piano. There was always a piano in our house, and there was an 8mm movie camera there. And so I was in order to try and sort of make a personality or a reputation for myself, I just started creating things. And so there's actually a thing we talk about on our radio show about when you're trying to find your purpose in life. you should apply what's known as the rule of 10 years old. And a lot of people now coming out of COVID are doing the Etch-a-Sketch thing, right? Where it's like, if somebody shook my Etch-a-Sketch and I don't have my life lined up anymore. And so I'm going to start over or quit my job, the great resignation, all of that. But when you look back at my life, when I was 10 years old, I was doing exactly this. I was surrounded by, gear everywhere. I was creating things. I was, and sort of average at everything, but trying to build, some sort of a personality. And it ended up being, if you look at everything that I've done in my life, whatever it is, successes and failures, it's with a microphone. It's with the equivalent of a reel-to-reel tape recorder and an 8mm camera. So that's really how I started, was just not being popular. It happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny you say that. When you were talking about the basement and the camera and all that, that's exactly what I was doing as a preteen with my younger siblings. We made shows and I lit the room and all the little things we do around here. I'm surrounded by lights. Wait a second. It's so funny how that just
I lit the
ingrained.
Room. You were the lighting director?
I was the lighting director. I was the director and the producer, and I edited, and I would take multiple VHS machines and edit. I mean, I didn't have the ability at the time because, it's just like what you have, what you use.
So you would roll VHS playback A, and then you would hit the record button on VHS record machine.
Yeah. And I had my dad. You remember the classic stereos with the big glass door, that everybody had with the, and my dad had one of those, and he had a high speed dub reel system. I think it was Radio Shack. Yes. And I would pause record and I would create the beds for under, like when I would introduce my brother to come out from behind the curtain and we'd play back, and of course I didn't have an external. I just had the microphone on board. My sister apparently still has these tapes in a vault. She's still got all the tapes. So archives.
We're going to have to pull those out. And it's interesting when you look at Gen Z, because the stuff that we do on our little radio show is spotting trends, and one of the trends that we've spotted recently is Gen Z going back and finding real cameras, and taking real photographs with cameras. The reel-to-reel tape machine is back now. 50 million records were sold last year. So a lot of the stuff that we did back in the day, and I'm sure there are people. I still have, you probably do too, thousands of VHS tapes, and a lot of people are using cassette tapes again to make mix tapes. So those were the halcyon days of technology, really.
Before I know Stephen's got a question for you. I wanted to ask you something about, because you talked about it a couple of times. Is tell us a little bit, for those who don't know, about your radio program and what's the unique thing that you and your wife in creating that. The Intelligence for Life program, and we hear it, in all the different markets, and really enjoy it.
What happened for me is that I don't want to back up too far, but I ended up in local news. I was 20 years old, and I started in radio at a place called WKIX in Raleigh, North Carolina. I swept the floors, and Rick Dees was the morning guy, and I read some copy off of the Newswire on Sunday nights late, and I got a job in Durham, North Carolina, just next door, developing the news film. There was, back in the day, people were like, "What are you talking about?" Yeah, we shot film, and then somebody had to process the film, so I was in charge of processing, and then ended up in Orlando and Nashville, and then New York City, and so. Those were the days when I really sort of learned through application, just through trial and error, how to be a journalist. And I forgot your question because I got lost in thinking of myself.
How that transitioned into you guys starting the radio program, the uniqueness that it is.
Thank you. Yeah, and so what happened after I connected those dots is that I ended up at CBS News in New York at 23 years old, and that's a bizarre story. And then I got tapped to be a sportscaster, not like baseball, not like a play-by-play guy, but more of an anthology guy, where I did downhill skiing as an announcer, everything from horse jumping to figure skating and the Tour de France bike race. And when Entertainment Tonight called up and said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming and being a host of this entertainment?" I didn't even know what it was because I was living in Europe at the time covering sporting events. I said, I'm not really that. I'm not doing that. And then they dangled the carrot of you can have free use of our recording studios, because I was still a fledgling professional musician. So I did that for 10 years. And when in the last 2 years of that, I did a PBS special called Live at Red Rocks, which my wife and I self bootstrapped because PBS wasn't going to pay for it, and it blew up. It was right at the time when Yanni and the Three Tenors and all were doing those pledge drive specials, and they were doing so well because you basically just gave the program away and then you gave CDs away, and then they would play the program ad nauseum, and that's what happened to me. And so I left Entertainment Tonight to be a full-time musician for a while, and was doing 50 shows a year, which, all in a row, which is it's brutal, especially when you're traveling with an orchestra. And at about that time, my daughter Prima, who was getting ready to turn 30, she was 2 years old. And so I had left an Italian woman from the Bronx with a 2-year-old, and I was following my dream. And so it ran out of gas after a while, the whole idea of being on the road that much. And I thought, what can I do at home and still, go out and do some concerts? And I thought, why don't I get back into radio? And I looked at the landscape, and it was the same thing that it had been for years. It was, Howard Stern and Fluffy and Danny and the Weasel in the morning, the morning zoo. And then there was, the work hours stuff. It was just sort of, like yacht rock, it's like 80s music, 90s music. And then there was Delilah at night, which was love songs. And I thought, I don't know how I would fit in here if I did this. And I read this book, which I recommend to kids a lot, which is Jack Trout's book, Differentiate or Die. And so I thought, well, what would be different, and what am I most interested in? It's almost like, when Schultz went to Europe and saw all the coffee shops and then started Starbucks. And one night my wife Connie and I were going to sleep for the evening, and she looked at my side of the bed and she said, it was like all kinds of, connectors and stuff like this, wires and stuff. She said, "This is our sleep chamber. What is all this stuff doing in here?" And I said, this is my stuff, And so a good husband, I wanted to cross complain. So I looked at her side of the bed, and it was all these stacks of magazines, and they had sticky notes in there. I said, "Well, what's all this garbage?" And she's like, "Well, these are all the articles that I'm going to get to. I haven't had time, but I put the sticky notes in there." And she had them all categorized. It was like the Oprah magazine, Better Homes and Gardens, and all the rest of that stuff. And the light bulb literally went off in my brain and said, why don't we create a radio show for this person? And I came up with the name of Intelligence for Your Life. And I pitched it to, the big guys, iHeart and Cumulus and everything. And when I pitched it with 10 full-time researchers. And they said, "It's too expensive. You can't just do a countdown show." So
just do a countdown show.
Yeah. So I bootstrapped it and started writing it myself. And it started off, we just called up 6 stations that had been, it was the Mickey Rooney thing. I've got a piano, I've got a barn, and called up 6 stations who happened to be playing my music and said, "You can have this show for free." And they started to get comments, because that was right in the early years of the fledgling years of the internet. And people were going crazy trying to figure out what's real, what's not, what's good information, what's not. And so I said, well, why don't we curate it for you? So we would take these, now AI can do that for you, but we would take these 10,000 word articles and we would turn them into 250 words. So it was like a minute 30 on the radio and surround them with music. And it took off because that's what people happened to be looking for. They were looking for someone to say, "Hey, I found this for you." So that's really how that grew. And that was way over 20 years ago.
And now the program's heard in, 34 million listeners, I believe was the last.
It's a big audience, and there's, and we do, there's 36 hours, a week we're on the air, but a lot of that is music. And the cool thing is I've been able to include my son Gib in it as well. He's a theoretical mathematics graduate who happens to be a real expert on just sort of everything, and so we're able to do it. We've really done everything as a family. When we go out and do tours, if it's like one or two, like two concerts, Gib plays ukulele. He'll be on stage with me, and he's also a comedian somehow, and he'll open the show. And then Prima, our daughter, is a ballerina. She'll dance with us, and Connie just yells at us that we're doing it all wrong. So it's great.
Kind of reading through some of your the published memoir you had back from recently here. One of the things I saw in there was about the concept of true grit. So talk about maybe a little bit of how that has kind of carried you through from early on, in the early days of piano learning and just learning it. And I think there's a reference of maybe Dr. Wagner and that significance there too.
Yeah. When at the end of concerts, when people come up to me at the stage and they say, "Oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't given up piano," or "When should I get my kid into music?" The answer to the first question is you can start now. And it's not a whole nother story, but I actually started an online course on how to play piano without reading sheet music because there's just so much evidence about what it does to your brain. And when you start talking to people about brain health, they really start listening. But the advice I give to parents about their kids is it's fine to learn a solo instrument, but find a way to get your kid into a band. And sadly, what's happened is a lot of these schools, especially elementary and junior high schools, have taken music out because it was quote unquote too expensive for them and they didn't think the kids needed it. But now there's all kinds of evidence showing that it improves math scores and especially with two-handed instrument, it goes across the brain and connects the left and right brain and across the hippocampus. So when you mentioned Dr. Wagner, I was a band geek, and now it's cool to be in the band. But back then, I was too skinny to be insured for football in junior high, and I was just not popular, And so the unpopular kids would go into the band, and like I said, it's different now, but it was definitely true back then, especially on Long Island, and Dr. Wagner was this guy that I mentioned. I did a whole chapter on him in the book because he made in New York State's music director of the year, band leader of the year. That's from a small town garden city on Long Island for somebody. Yeah. Because he was all about just come on. You put down when you were asked to join the band, you would put down the top 3 things that you wanted to play. So I put down drums, and drums, and so they gave me a trumpet because they didn't. Right? They had a Piatti cymbal guy who went, and that was it. So I had a trumpet, and you have your case and you take it to. But I didn't know how to play the trumpet. I didn't know how to go. There's a trumpet around here now that I still play. But what he would do is he would get us all together. And he would just say, "Come on, let's make some mistakes," to your point. And we like what, and he wouldn't even put sheet music up there at first. And he would go, "All right, here we go. It's a ba 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 ba," and you would try to find that on your instruments. Kids holding saxophones, like, what do I do? And he'd come over and he'd show you. And the most amazing thing, and I described this in the book, is I remember our parents coming to, it was going to be, okay, come to the recital, right? And so here we are, there's like 30 kids in this band / orchestra. And, we all had our fingers in our noses, and it's like 7th graders. And our parents come up and we're playing like, we're playing like Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C sharp minor. And it's like, the choir's not going, la, 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 la. And our parents are like, what happened? And they're like, okay, yeah, that's my kid. What happened was it was Dr. Wagner's thing of just being not like that's a wrong note. It's like, oh, that's an interesting. Let's try that again. Okay, all right, okay, trombones. Find this on the trombone, And
wow.
That was one of those things where you look back at, we all know the teacher that we loved back in junior high and elementary school. I look back at that, and that really sort of shaped my life, where it was I just became unafraid of making mistakes. And so that really launched me into a life of taking risks, and it doesn't always turn out right. But I think that was the thing also in the 1950s and 1960s where, and I don't mean this spiritually, but it was at least secularly, you understood that no one was coming to save you. You weren't going to, nobody lived in their parents' basement, right? There weren't any video games. And it was, you lived to be picked for dodgeball. So you're in the back practicing dodgeball, it was a great time to grow up, as you guys know.
Well, we'll follow up to that real quick. So as a point of there's not too late to learn. So I learned piano myself, started taking it early on, I think probably second grade or something like that, up through eighth grade. And then I got plugged in with sports, but the appreciation, the learning of music and what you just said in terms of the concept, being able how to hear something. I got into high school, and my second high school, junior year, they're like, okay, you're in choir or you're in band.
Yes.
And I'm like, well,
yeah, right.
I don't sing that great. I think I'm okay, but I'm not, and so they were like full up or whatever. So I was like, okay, I'll be in band. And so I picked the saxophone up. Mm-hmm. And my junior year, they said, hey, can you be a roadie for the band? So I just transferred there. I was learning the saxophone, and I was a roadie for the main, jazz band. And by my senior year, I was second seat saxophone. And so I never picked it up before. And so it's just that learning of music, that appreciation for it, and being able to hear those things. I think what you just said is if you understand concepts like that versus don't get that wrong, don't do this. It's okay. Here, let's fine tuning that. So it's a great concept.
Yeah, I hear you. And I grew up with my mom was a retired. Actually, Betty Friedan wrote about this in the book "The Feminine Mystiques" back in the 1950s, 1960s. The suburbs began to grow on Long Island because there were so many more people working in New York after the war. And so this all, Nassau County, Suffolk County, Queens, they all were built up, and the trains started going out there. And that was my dad. He worked in Manhattan, and he would come home and on the railroad. And my mom was a ranked tennis player who actually ended up being a surgical nurse. That's how she met my dad. She was there when they operated on her on his appendix, and they fell in love somehow. I don't know. They never told me the whole story, but that's the broad strokes. But what Betty Friedan writes about was that back in that day, women were encouraged to quit their job. And it's interesting because this is a conversation that we're having now, in the current zeitgeist, to quit their jobs and become a mom. And it was really looked down upon that you would be working and not be taking care of your children. There were no nannies back then. And so my mom decided that one of her jobs was going to be to get her kids. I had two older sisters. One of them played piano, the other one played cello. So when I came along, I ended up with a trumpet in my hand at 6 years old, and then also my mom decided I was going to have piano lessons, and so there were a couple of teachers that had worked at the Juilliard School in New York, and they were commuting, and so Mrs. Andriani was one of them, and she ended up being my teacher, and like the Juilliard teacher teaching a 6-year-old, and so it was all So I actually can show you this. Can you see this?
Yeah.
You only see this much of it. Anyway, it was like that, the hand exercises that all the musicians know. And she put a timer on top of my piano, one of those Minute Minder egg timers, and would just tick away for 2 hours. I couldn't go outside and play with my friends until I had practiced piano and did all that. And I just, I quote unquote hated my mother, but she kept after it. And until I was 18 years old, she was on me every day. If you haven't touched the piano, you'd been there for 2 hours. And then just, and that was my nemesis, was this thing. And the story I tell on stage is, to this day when 60 Minutes comes on, I get the high.
you have twitches.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, but getting to what Stephen was saying is that I learned as a you know as a you know it's Mozart's Rondo alla Turca, by the way. I learned I learned to read music. But then when I started getting into bands, rock and roll bands and jazz bands and stuff, just like you, I realized that I need, it's okay to read music, but I needed to listen, you know? And so I had to sort of unlearn all of this stuff. And so if you were going like, you know, with a good jazz musician, if you go, you'll go, oh, that's C3, you know, I couldn't do any of that. You know, I was just
Right.
in front of me like a monkey. I was able to play it. And that's really, it's interesting because kids are learning now because you remember back in the day, it was, he plays by ear. There was, and people would leave the room. Oh, okay, never mind. You know, yeah.
Right. Yeah, the ability to hear that and just go with the quote improvisation concept was a new, but it was so fun. So that's good.
Yeah.
So one question that I was just thinking as you mentioned that is, tell us about our listeners and our viewers about the course that you created. I think it's really interesting and kind of inspirational if you're 50 and you quit playing instruments 40 years ago, kind of like
I mean,
a lot of us.
Yeah, and I had mentioned this earlier, but a lot of people will come up at the end of a concert. You know, when people see me on stage playing and having a good time, and I really do have a good time on stage, especially since I used to have stage fright as a little kid because they put me into these recitals, you know, and scare the heck out of you as a little kid. And I didn't play for a long time, but some therapy got rid of that. But when people come up at the end of the show and they're saying, "Oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't quit," but they're also when people are sitting in the audience. So my audience is women who have dragged their husbands or their boyfriends to a John Tesh concert, and they don't, and the guys. They're half asleep, and there's always a guy, you know, like with his arms folded like this, you know, the whole thing. And our whole goal, we have a 10-piece band. Our whole goal is to get that guy, and so we save until like I don't know, until 20, 30 minutes into the show, we save the song that we know he's going to recognize for that moment, and that song is the basketball theme, which is.
Yes.
They're like, oh, that's my song, you know. So we get a lot of those guys that are people that are like, oh, well, if this guy, this is not Elton John, this is not Billy Joel, this is the guy who used to read the celebrity birthdays on television. If this guy can do that, I probably can do it too. And you know, and I like writing with the white keys, you know. So there's a lot of white keys and stuff. So I thought, why don't when this app called CourseCreator.com came along, it was like, oh, you could actually create a course. And I thought, what can I teach anybody? I'm not a teacher, you know. And then you get the coaches, you know, who are like, all you need to know is like 20% more than the person who's taking the course. Mm-hmm. And so I started, the name of the course is the John Tesh Piano Method. And then the subtitle is how to learn how to play piano by learning my songs. And so what I'm able to do is put that song up, you know, Round Ball Rock, or put up, you know, a thing called Heart of the Sunrise, which is. And songs that in the 7 public televisions that we've done, the music specials, you can see those songs and you can see us play them, and then I can show you, you know, step by step, you know, and I have loops, you know, and the mistake that I made was the first round was I really taught I taught it like this, and people are like, whoa. I've never played piano before. Where do I put my hand? I'm like, put your hand,
right?
You know? And I realized that the people who really want to learn are people who are beginners.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that really lit people up was when we were able to, because this is what we do on the radio, was connect what happens when you play the piano to your brain. What happened, mm-hmm. And there are all kinds of big studies out there. You know, Mayo Clinic, you know, Stanford, about how it is actually, you know, a block up against, you know, Alzheimer's and dementia.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Can you tell us if that was really beneficial for you when you got the diagnosis, and then how that then led you to go, you know what, I need God's help if I'm going to survive this?
Yeah, when I was 9 years ago yesterday, when I walked into a doctor's office, had an exam, and it was like, well, there's something different here. I had a very rare form of prostate cancer. Now, a lot of people know that well, you go in, you get your PSA blood test, and if those numbers move up or down, then we'll go on with different tests. The problem was that my PSA was 0.4 for 5 years, which is very, very low, and it signals that like you have nothing going on in that area in your engine room, and but my doctor did the second test, which is the digital exam, the hand exam, and he said, "Wait, John, there's something going on here," and I'm feeling some lumps basically, and that there's something going on here. Within 2 weeks, ended up being a sonogram, a biopsy, and more testing and an MRI, and all of a sudden it was like, yeah, these tumors have broken out of your prostate. They call it extraprostatic extension, and it's in your lymph nodes and it's headed for your bones. And so, for a minute, our hair was on fire. I was 63 years old, and I immediately did what the doctor told me to do, was to get my affairs in order. I checked my insurance, figured out who was going to replace me on the radio show, and I became a cancer patient. I spoke like a cancer patient, and this is actually in the book as well. And I started. I was in a lot of pain because the cancer was before they could work on me in surgery, before I could get in there. It was growing like it was a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. And so I was taking Vicodin, and then I was chasing the Vicodin with whiskey because I was feeling sorry for myself, and still trying to do the radio show, when I was sober. But my wife, who is an Italian girl from the Bronx, I mean, full-blooded Italian, and an actress who also was one of those people who would go door to door to all of the marketing agencies and the and the movie studios and the hard knocks world of that world was just like no to no, and no, this is no. I'm not going to take this as gospel. And so right here in this studio, we stood toe to toe, and just had a horrible argument. I mean, terrible things to each other, and I left. I wanted to go die someplace else, and so I got on a bicycle. I don't know, why would I get on a bicycle? Why not get a motorcycle or something? I got on a bicycle with saddlebags on it, and I said, I'll be back in a few days, and I decided I was going to ride 140 miles up the coast of California. Well, I got 20 miles in, and I pulled my bike over, and I called my wife and said, "I'm so sorry. Can I come home?" She's like, no, you're going to finish the ride. And so on that 140-mile ride, it was, God just took care of me. And it was like, you're an idiot. The true nature of God is health and healing. And then a friend of ours, once I got back and repatriated my marriage, and this is, again, all in the book, which is just a scary part of the book. It's the title of that chapter is "The Pity Party," which is what my wife called it. And somebody handed us a CD from a guy named Andrew Womack. And Andrew Womack is a pastor in Charis Bible School in Woodland Park, Colorado, and his book was the CD was him reading his book, and the book was called "A Better Way to Pray." And it really the cornerstone of his message was Mark 11:23, which I actually have tattooed on my left arm to always remind me, which is, whoever says to this mountain, "Be removed and be cast into the sea," and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will be done, shall have whatever he says. Therefore, whatever you ask when you pray, believe that you already receive it and you will have it. And then Mark 11:22 is have faith in God. And I had missed that when I grew up in the Methodist Church, and I just didn't. Maybe I read that verse, but it didn't. And it's true where until you're going through something, the verses in the Bible and the promises in the Bible really don't light up for you, I don't think. And then somebody else mentioned Proverbs 18:21 to me, which was death and life are in the power of the tongue, because that's what I was killing myself was what I was saying. And then so understanding that when Jesus went to the cross, he not only took our sins, he took our griefs and sorrows and sicknesses. That was when I just, my whole, what Romans 12:2, I was transformed by the renewing of my mind. And I was able to see myself at 95 years old, thriving. And from that point, I went into battle mode, and I became less of a victim and joined my wife in deciding that this was not for us.
Amazing. I want to ask you along with that is, first of all, I would say Andrew Womack is a programmer on our network, and he was one of our earliest podcast guests. So he's wonderful, wonderful man. And we enjoy.
If you can get past the accent, that's the funniest thing. When we took the CD and we put it into, I wasn't even going to listen to the CD. Somebody handed it to us. And, when you're sick, everybody wants to give you a CD, and they want to send you like the keto diet and everything. And so Connie stuck it in the car as we were driving, and he's like, what did he say? He said, why don't you use your head for something more than a hat rack, And he just came on really, really strong. I didn't even do it. He was basically Gomer Pyle, right? Yeah. But it was, what a revelation it was. And now my wife has started this healing Bible study on Thursdays, and we lay hands on each other, and
it's awesome.
And a lot of this, just really quickly, it really fits in with what I learned as a sports broadcaster, where for some reason I ended up, covering these massive sporting events, 2 Olympic Games in 92 and 96. And also for 12 years, I covered the U.S. ski team, the World Cup. And so here I was with these really top level, athletes, everybody from, the likes of, Michael Phelps to Greg LeMond, who won the Tour de France, and Bernard, and Franz Klammer. And I remember covering the Wengen downhill, which is the longest downhill race, and the Austrians were always, and the Swiss were always on top of the medal stands. And I'm up by the start house the day before the actual race, the downhill. And Franz Klammer doesn't speak any English, and everybody else, they were doing these test runs. They would go down, they take like 6 runs on the course. Klammer took 1 run on the course, and then he was leaned up against the start house, and his coach is over there, talking to him, and Klammer's got his eyes closed, with his goggles on and his ski poles, and he's just going like this. He's got his eyes closed, and he's going, and then he would lean down, and he would go like this, and then just, and this went on for like 3 minutes, just like this, a complete science. And I asked his coach, I said, what's he doing? He says, well, he's memorizing the course. He's going through the course. He knows where his ski tips are in relation to the gates. He knows how his edges are moving. He knows how he's unweighting his left ski. He knows where his speed needs to be on the 3rd gate. And he can see the finish line. And not only, John, can he see the finish line, but he can see himself on the medal stand, not on the bronze or the silver stand, but on the gold medal stand. And he can see it like I can see you, right now. And that visualization, once I saw that and recognized it, I started looking for that in other athletes. And so, Bart Connor as a gymnast, Carrie Strug and Mary Lou Retton, and in track and field, and at that level, those men and women really all have about the same skill. But it's the people, you've heard that, it's a mind thing. But the people, especially somebody like Michael Phelps, and when he would be swimming, his coach would say, put in the video, and that, because there was a video of him winning a big race, and he would watch it, hundreds and hundreds of times between races, and looking at each one of his arm strokes and all of that. And so that visualization was something that I learned by watching it at that level. And when I went back and remembered all those stories and then combined that with my faith, I was able to see my finish line as being up on that middle stand at 95 years old, even when I was in the middle of chemo and I lost a kidney.
Unbelievable. So it became about seeing it, envisioning it, believing it, and then the manifestation.
Yeah. And it is also, it amplifies the concept of faith without works is dead, because there are people who sit in their basement and they try to manifest stuff, and it's sad because people are being led down that road, but you have to do the work, and right. I learned quickly that God wanted me well, but I also learned that God had trained the surgeons and the oncologists that were working on me, and there are many, many options when you're going through a high level battle with cancer, and so you need 2 things. One is you need to decide what you have faith for, And then you need an advocate because there comes a time at a certain level when you have that much pain and there's that much fatigue, you just don't even feel like you don't have the energy to pray. You know,
Yeah.
you don't have the energy to even think about your future. And so the advocacy of my wife Connie, I mean, she just quit everything and wrapped her arms around me and would keep people away from me. You know, the worst thing that can happen to you is somebody who doesn't know how to deal with grief and sickness, where they come in and you probably have met people like this and they go, "How are you?" You know, it's like, what you're basically saying is, how much longer do you have?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that's why
is
part of
it?
the truth. She kept those people out of my life.
That's awesome. Well, kudos to wives who, realize, we just talked about this the other day. A friend of mine, I was talking about a situation that happened and I really felt like God spoke through my wife and he goes, "Oh, you didn't know the Holy Spirit had blonde hair."
Oh, that's good. That's really good. Yeah, and isn't it interesting? You know, Francis Chan, who you guys may have talked to before, wrote this great book called Forgotten God, and I used to go to his church every now and then because that's where our kids went, and I read that, but I had no idea what it was about. And I read the book, oh my gosh, he's talking about the fact that the church doesn't recognize, a lot of churches don't even recognize the power of the Holy Spirit, and that's something we talk about all the time when we're in churches. Like, understand that Jesus, he said it himself. He left someone that was going to be more powerful, influential in your life than he was. And so I learned to recognize that because I didn't, not for nothing against Methodists, but it was a lot of memorization for me.
We've got, for our listeners in the show notes, I've got links to your book, Relentless, the Unleashing a Life of Purpose, Grit, and Faith, as well as how to connect with you with the program, the radio program, and where to find that as well. And Stephen has, I think, one more quick question for you.
Yeah, no, we talked earlier about kind of the impact that John had on you early on in life, and that decision of band and everything. Who have been some of your more recent mentors as you've got further into your growth?
The interesting thing for me, Stephen, is that I think people, and I was one of these people who think about, if you're going to have a mentor, it needs to be somebody that comes over to your house, or you go to a meeting, or whatever. But with the beauty of, and a lot of people put down all the social media stuff, but the beauty of something like YouTube is that there's some great teachings on YouTube, and there was a guy that became my mentor, and for 10 years, and he didn't even know it. I went to a Promise Keepers event. It was massive. It was at the LA Coliseum. There were 80,000 men there. And I always joke that Promise Keepers is the place where where women send their men who are bad or have the potential to be bad. And my wife said, "Hey, this sounds like something you need to go to." So I went to it. Here we are, 80,000 men, and Dr. Tony Evans was there, and he was preaching on closet Christians. At us, and he was just saying that, you guys, all of you men out there, I know you've gone CIA for God, you have all these blessings, and you're just in the closet with the light off and the door closed, quivering. And so, everybody in this town has come out of the closet but you. It was like, whoa, I got chills even thinking about it. And so I saved that tape, and I used to listen to that tape over and over and over again. And a cassette tape, right? Until it just sort of burned out. Right. We ended up, 10 or 15 years later, we ended up on a same program. We were in a church somewhere, and he spoke, and then he goes into the audience, and I went up and spoke, and I just threw out everything I was going to say, and just talked about his mentorship to me, and how much that meant to me, and how we have to realize that when we're talking in any format, people are listening to us, and that we can become their mentors. And so that he was the most powerful mentor. I mean, there are musicians I follow. I was a progressive rock guy. You know very much what that's about.
Yeah, right.
I love the guys from Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and even Kansas and Dixie Drakes and all.
Sure.
But and it's one of the reasons why we actually started a coaching program. We have about 150 people that we meet with every Thursday, who either come to us through our prayer course or through the piano course or whatever, and we just, when you get to it, it's interesting to be mentored by someone who has made a lot of mistakes. I would much rather listen to a pastor like Andrew Womack, who was in the Vietnam War.
Right.
While he's in the war, he was reading the Bible and understanding his life lessons, rather than somebody who was only in the seminary.
Yeah.
I've been driven hard and put away wet, as they say in the cowboy movies, and so it's fun for me to mentor others at this point.
That's wonderful. Well, I want to respect your time. I think we've had an amazing conversation, and I really appreciate you taking your time with us. This has been really good. And for those who, like David said, he's going to put in the show notes how to connect with John. You want to just mention any ways that like in your website or in social media handles?
Yeah, I mean, it's our Facebook is facebook.com/John Tesh, and the website is tesh.com. So people, and we have a team who is making sure that I see every email. I love it, and it's a unique time for me, because our audience is on the radio and in concerts and whatever we do is about 80% women 55 plus, with this massive bump at 65 plus, and we all share the same goals, which is beating the odds and continuing to learn. There are a lot of people who retired who are unretiring now because they realized that they needed to go and find their purpose. These conversations are great for me, and you guys, thank you for the great questions. And it was great therapy for me.
I want to thank you because, I've enjoyed your radio program. I've learned things, that you guys will say, hey, did you know that, this is, this here, especially this stuff has to do with your brain and focus and helping people.
And we basically try all this stuff ourselves. The one thing that was a crash and burn for me was when, I think it was a neurologist, and it may have been Peter Attia, who wrote the book Outlive, and the advice was, if you really want to shake up your brain, when you're brushing your teeth, stand on one leg. And I remember it vividly because it was the first and last time I did it. And I started brushing my teeth, and I lost my balance, and I hit the wall in the bathroom, and I'm 6'6" and 228 pounds, and the whole house shook, and my wife's like, "What are you doing?" I'm improving my brain. She goes, "Stop it."
You take a wall down with you in the process. Well,
I just want to say that we appreciate you taking the time, especially on the West Coast so early. And I look forward to reading your book. The book is Relentless: Unleashing a Life of Purpose, Grit, and Faith. And it's always great to have people on that talk about what God has done in their lives, and we appreciate that very much, John.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, we want to thank everybody that's joined us for another great episode. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe. And if you're on pray.com, we want to say a special thank you and hello to you. And the effortless outro music of John Tesh. Always, you know what, John? We might have to do some
collaboration.
We might have to collaborate. I think we're thinking of some things here. Right as we record.
Let's go.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you, John. We'll see you, everybody, next week. Remember, we drop a new episode every Tuesday. Join us next time on the GB America podcast.